Chapter 57. When the earth was young. Long before the magma cooled. Long before the sand became glass. Long before the glass became embers in dying light. I was. Flowers that grew told a story to me. Of the earth children, scared of the tyrant, sky. Of the little whispers they had heard from the warm sun, cloaked by jealous clouds. When the time came, when the world turned, they would die and wither. But that was natural and right. The sky came and promised immortality. And service. And fear. My mind ached at such injustice. My blood boiled at such injustice. My heart burned with righteous fury. My stomach rent with tar and hate. My bones sealed beneath the ground. These all shook, as I sensed again the whisper of his lies. And they might boil and burn away. And leave only rock. And peaceful quiet. Once more.
Look, you've gotta believe me. Lorelei was right with us, and...
She had moved before she meant to. It was only at the last moment that she found herself stopping, seemingly in slow motion. Chow hadn't flinched, or even looked surprised as she advanced on him. And perhaps, that stung worse than if she had actually. Lowering the stock of her rifle, Ruslana said nothing at first, but the look on her face said all that she needed.
"T is as you say, of course. I'm not doubting you, any of you. It's just... I can't."
Grinding her teeth against one another, Ruslana tried to make the edges of her face stand out less, to look less frightening, to be less intimidating, and she could see the nervousness on their faces. How Chow wasn't letting it get to him, and still smiling that laid-back smile. How Zemby was trying very patently not to look at her, but also wasn't trying to hide her anger, or her confusion. Perhaps worst of all, Bones wasn't doing anything. After all, he had been alive for a long time. Chances are he had seen plenty of scenes like this before.
"Grendolf. Report. There has been no sign of her. I have contacted others who have an interest in her welfare. We have no idea where she may have vanished to. Ruslana."
At once, Grendolf appeared at her side, as if he had never left. And it was clear that the Lich was almost always present around her, but she no longer cared or even noticed. After all, they had work to do. And Grendolf was always reliable. Almost always.
"Right. You're telling me that even your strong, legendary magics... You can't find one girl, not right now."
But she had to get it together, so she did. And the shaking stopped, and the worries stopped, and she dealt with the same ways she always had.
"Sorry. I've let you all down by worrying like this. Chow."
He laughed, as if it was no big deal, nothing at all like life back home, like he hadn't even felt it. Come to think of it, he did look as if he had been awfully burnt recently, so perhaps he hadn't, not physically at least.
"Don't, seriously. We're all worried, but Lorelei is a witch, right? I'm sure she'll be back soon, with some kind of tale of adventure under her hat. Maybe she's training with her mentor."
But Grendolf turned away, and then disappeared. Still, Ruslana found a kind of peace in the feeling of emptiness. Of course it had been a ridiculous fantasy to try to protect even such a small population, just try to herd them together and recreate the mistakes of the past all over again. And of course she had just end up duplicating the same things she had hated from back home, because that was all she could do.
"Why don't you all go? Why don't you, is that something to eat? You can go eat it in the mess. I'll be along in a bit. I want to do some maintenance. Walk some, clear my thoughts."
A smile is just 2 lines. You can do that much. Come on. And she managed to smile, and the 3 of them passed on into district and Ruslana felt like collapsing, but there was no time. Silently, she climbed the new, layered walls, lined with bolt holes that would do nothing against Dragunov, but she felt obligated to put up for the safety of those under her protection.
Right. My protection.
Laughing, she made the mistake of letting her eyes go down for just a few seconds. And when Ruslana awoke, the night, rich with the same day-bright glow as high noon, was in full swing. Though the sky was purple-black, you could see even without artificial lights, 4 golden pillars of dust clung tightly to the air, choking the breath even as they were beautiful to look at.
Hey. Do you mind if I come up here?
Paul didn't wait for a response, though his civilian climbing time was less than perfect. She hadn't built the complex with Paul in mind, of course, but Ruslana did feel a tinge of regret for the ladders that had been built with mass production in mind, not ease of use.
Go on. I'm just watching, and waiting.
Paul whistled, and laid out several dried and inedible noodle dishes, that had been turned into something incredible with the addition of spice, water, and tenderness.
No one's angry at you, you know. I mean, I'm not. Not that I have any reason to be, but, look, you cannot keep pushing yourself like this. There's some sort of strange autonomous defense jet on the fritz, but you can't defend against roaming aerocraft on an empty stomach.
She couldn't help it, and laughed, and ate, and as simple as noodles were, they were also absolutely great.
Thanks, Paul. Did you hear if there was any news? No. Lorelei isn't back, if you're wondering. We've mostly just been playing some games. That short girl is a real card sharp, possibly. I can't tell if she's cheating or just very lucky. Maybe both. Can you mention that I really am sorry? And that I'll be along soon, for real. I just have to. Say no more.
Paul held up a hand, and adjusted his glasses with the other. It didn't exactly make him look quite as cool as he had planned, but there are better things than looking cool, after all.
Just do yourself a favor, and rely more on that spooky guy, he doesn't seem to need any sleep. A friend of mine once mentioned you could get by on less than 4 hours, but I'm pretty sure she was cray-cray. Probably from sleep deprivation, let me tell you. It's a killer.
He kept talking as he left, and given the speed with which he climbed ladders, that was some time. But, she didn't mind it, not entirely. Nor did Ruslana mind the weird, almost insect-like sound that the phosphor clouds made as they floated through the evening sky. They were melodic, and calming, and though she didn't feel tired anymore, perhaps Paul's allegorical friend had been right, would have been pleasant to dream to. Sighing, Ruslana held out her hand, memory returned to it with a slow, whirring twitch. Then the drone lay still, nestled in her open palm.
Status report.
She murmured, to no one in particular. How do you make up for so many failures, or redefine your successes when they seem to be decreasing? She hadn't spoken to Grendolf recently about his own worries, but one of the dragons was awake, and that was half of a failure for him. There needed to be something she could do, and adapting to the situation.
What's going to happen when we leave this place? When it's gone? Is the price of failure forgetfulness?
Her drone could not answer her, not that Ruslana imagined it would have had an answer for her.
Ruslana.
It was incredibly curt, and given the elaborate manner of speaking the Lich usually held, she noticed it instantly. He didn't sound angry, per se, but exhausted, and resigned, and perhaps even sad, if such a notion could be known to the great Crimson Lich, but of course it could.
Grendolf. Rough night, hey. They are all rough, eventually. I came to apologize, for not considering that your feelings might have been. No, we were both feeling stretched before this, and I just, you know. I thought things were going well, for once. Which was a mistake, but, so it is. I'm sorry too. Actually, truly. I wanted to ask if you had something to point me at, something I could do to help with the matter of Dragunov. I do not think so, no. But, the phosphor clouds are beautiful, are they not? Truly. At first I thought they were fireflies, golden ones, like the kind you hear about in storybooks. Ah, things like that were rationed, pulp was used for comics, and since there wasn't a lot to do in the end, some of them became works of art, real beautiful things. You sound, however, as if you're referring to something a little more personal.
It was weird, maybe they were a good fit for each other. Ruslana sometimes liked to entertain the idea that, in another world, she had managed to befriend Grendolf a little sooner, kick his teeth in a bit, and that she and he and Kaylee
woodcut, actual wood. I can't remember, but it was still abridged and an adaptation of this famous storyteller's works, I think. I mean, for all that it meant to me, I can't remember the stories themselves. What does that say? It's hard to remember them, when you're young. I have a few I remember in sounds, or colors, but only just.
His aside felt an odd confession, and for a minute, Ruslana wanted to ask if perhaps they were even referring to the same book, or collection, perhaps, by the same teller of tales. Then the idea seemed ridiculous, and she burst into laughter.
Look! So far as it stands, they were just stories. But, they were put a lot of ideas of what service could mean into my head, and I suppose, that's why I've always found the idea of set roles very appealing. A hero is a hero, a villain. A soldier is a cog, but a vital one. Of course, nothing is ever that easy, but...
Above them, the clouds had started to dissipate slightly. Grendolf had froze. He was trembling. The first pillar of light came directly from the heavens, then quickly was joined by 6 pillars in rapid succession. They shone and twinkled in an intricate dance before shattering entirely, and the ensuing wave of sound, howling and crystalline, felt as if it might tear her ears from their sockets. When finally the terrible noise had died down, Dragunov was floating above the distant clouds, his titanic form seeming vast even so far away. His roar was as clear a challenge as always. But this time, it was returned. Along the newly poured roads, the ground had grown weak and had been cleared, and what cracks had formed seemed minor and unimportant at the time. Yet it was from the tiny sea of cracks came little vents of steam, and where the steam met the sky, the two recoiled in hate. The first blow was struck by the hammer-swung weight of a tail more devastating than any mace, sending chunks of crushed bitumen in every direction. And it struck again, and again, each blow more furious than the last at any obstruction that stood barred to one, all-consuming goal. Dragunov. And for a minute, that moment when two rivals who have found an all-consuming desire for nothing more than the complete obliteration of the other, a call of hate can sound ecstatic. Jumping to life, Ruslana shouldered her rifle and immediately began sliding down the ladder.
What are you doing, child? We have failed. I have failed. We haven't failed. I'm still breathing. Do you think you can?
But the calmness in Ruslana's voice had a similar effect on Grendolf.
Of course. Should you fall, I shall do what I can to evacuate those that remain.
The soldier and the lich, one young and one ancient, stared at one another.
Do not fall.
And then Grendolf was gone, and Ruslana was alone once more. Even though she was only running, the surface of the road made it much easier. Terrain seemed to dance and flit around her, clearings and trees and rivers that were home, now. She could see one of the markers the cave dwellers had built, and knew precisely where she was. Bracing against it, Ruslana took a deep breath, and prepared herself. She tried to remember what you were supposed to ask the old soldier for when going against a superior foe, and so long had it been that they had known what they had been fighting, Ruslana couldn't remember a time when she had known. Well, anything'd be great. To death, then. Ruslana remained motionless as the great dragons fought in the air above, and on the ground, and deep within the earth, for the world itself was nothing but clay to them. Dragunov would blast to rain, clearing entire fields of life in the hiss of an ozone-torn moment, and though occasionally he would score a hit against Lazarus, causing the red-black dragon to roar in agony, more often than not his light would echo on into the distance, leaving only fire and ruin. But Lazarus gave as good as he got. Where he stood, it seemed the earth itself fed into him, even as it died from the overpoweringly choking smog that ceaselessly belched from his maw. Occasionally he would crane his neck towards Dragunov and cough into the gilded dragon's lungs, and as some of Dragunov's eyes clouded and glassed over, both would wrestle for better holds or vantage points, crushing trees and boulders with impunity. Whenever they got too close to District, Ruslana found a new place to hide and fired a tracer into the air, the green light of the round drawing their attention enough for them to move further inland, and closer to her. It continued for hours, but luck seemed to favor her enough that even though the heat was scorching and she had long since switched to protective headgear to keep breathing through the smog, and yet, their blows grew tired and more sluggish. Finally, Dragunov rose into the air and launched himself at Lazarus, missing entirely and crashing into the earth. Oddly, for a moment she was certain that there were wounds on him, wounds that Lazarus had not inflicted. But before Ruslana could risk a closer look, Dragunov roared and took off into the dying night sky, leaving Lazarus twisting and writhing on the ground behind him. Lazarus belched one final, defiant and hateful cloud of char smoke, and then tunneled into the exposed ground. Utter ruin was the only sign their combat had taken place, but the night had been survived, for now.
They barely even noticed.
Her voice not even a whisper, Ruslana tried to rationalize what happened, to justify the power that the great beasts held, or her own lack of it. What she found was a feeling beyond fear or doubt, an awe that left her trembling, but somehow.
Yeah. You better both run. This isn't over. I so swear it.
It was that adrenaline that carried her forwards, even absolutely exhausted. And even though the sun was up and the new day had begun when she limped back home, some part of her mind felt exhilarated, for though she had neither drawn blood or lost it, despite a cough she'd have to look at from Lazarus' choking smog. They could be hurt, for they had hurt one another. And they knew pain, and fear, like she did, and Dragunov seemed to have some strange wounds from some other battle. She could find a way to do this, and the next battle would be on her terms. The next battle would be. The ground made for an incredibly good bed as she face-faulted into it. When she awoke, it was in an actual bed, with actual sheets. They smelled like flowers, not the kind that grew here on the island, whether they were the wide, beautiful brimmed ones that had pink petals that smelled of rich chocolate, or the small and delicate things that had no aroma, but glistened beautifully against the breeze.
Mom!
Of course it was a dream, and yet there was nothing wrong with that. It was calming, soothed away the aches and fears she had felt. Maybe.
This is really weird, but you're going to have to bear with me for now. I promise I'm okay. Lorelei.
Ruslana forced herself up, and knew that she was probably standing in the real world as well. She could feel the horrible disconnect of a dream readjusting to fit what's happening in the invisible subconscious of the real.
Don't force yourself to get up, rest, please. I'm all right, we're all right. You're out pretty bad, and I'm going to fix you up. I promise.
Ruslana forced herself back into the bed, and could feel the slight lag between it happening in reality and the dream. The cooling sensation that washed over her wasn't unwelcome either, but...
Is everyone else okay? Yes, even Grendolf. He's not in the best of it, but I think we'll get him sorted out. Just be prepared, when you wake up. There's a lot to take in.
And despite the calm, peaceful place she was in, Ruslana felt a fear unlike anything she had felt before.
But, we'll get through this, together. I promise. There's even cold, slightly weird tasting fudge waiting for you.
And she laughed, and let exhaustion overcome her. There was a beach, where perhaps 3 years ago, a girl had washed ashore. It was a beach that had seen many come and go, some had tried to settle upon it, and others had journeyed out to sea as far as they could go, though all had turned back eventually or been swallowed by distant tides. But this day, the waves were steely grey, and as the tide rose they fell, tossing up only bone sand in their wake. At long last, the age of collapse had come. Chapter end.